All right. Morning, everyone. We'll be on the record in case number 2006-00463 in the matter of the application of East Kentucky Power Cooperative for a certificate of public convenience and necessity for the construction of a 345 kilovolt electric transmission project in Clark, Madison, and Garrett County, Kentucky. My name is Mark David Goss. Excuse me, I'm chairman of the Kentucky Public Service Commission. Seated to my right is John Clay, vice chair. Seated to my left is Caroline Clark, commissioner. Welcome to Commissioner Clark. I think this is her first hearing. So we're very happy to have you, and we're very happy to have a full complement of commissioners now. This matter is before the Commission for hearing today upon East Kentucky Power's application pursuant to KRS 278-020 for a certificate of public convenience and necessity to construct a 345 kilovolt transmission line that is 35.6 miles in length and which runs from the J.K. Smith Station in Clark County through Madison County and terminating in Garrett County at the West Garrett substation near Lancaster, Kentucky. Let's go ahead, ladies and gentlemen, and take appearances of counsel before we go much further. Good morning, Mr. Goodpastor. Nice to see you again. Would you formally identify yourself for the record, please, sir?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sherman Goodpastor. I'm Senior Corporate Counsel for East Kentucky Power. Sitting to my right is Ms. Mary Jane Warner. She's our Manager of Engineering.
All right. Nice to see you, Ms. Warner.
Thank you.
For the Public Service Commission staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Rick Bertelson for Public Service Commission. I have with me members of the staff who are on the team of this case: Ely Russell with Engineering, John Rognes, Ruth Rowles, and Jorge Valadares.
Okay. And I think we also, Mr. Bertelson, have limited intervenors Philip Price and Didra Price. Is that right?
That is correct, Your Honor, but I'm not certain that they are here in the room.
Are the Prices presently in the hearing room this morning? Philip Price or Didra Price? Has anyone heard from them with regard to their intention to appear today?
The last time I spoke with either of them was in July. I spoke with Mr. Price, and at that time he indicated that it was not their intent to actually appear at today's hearing.
Okay. Mr. Goodpastor, have you heard anything from them?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll assume that even though they're limited intervenors, they do not wish to participate in this morning's hearing.
We do, Your Honor, have Joanna Kirby and Brian Kirby, who submitted comments in the case and who did appear at a local public hearing in Richmond on August 2nd, who have an interest in the case as their property is crossed by the proposed line.
Where are the Kirbys? Okay. Nice to see y'all. Thank you for coming this morning. Mr. Bertelson, I think that the Commission held public comment in this matter. In fact, had a public hearing in Richmond on August the 2nd. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
And I was not present. Commissioner Vice Chair Clay took care of that hearing. But I understand that there was some public comment made at the hearing.
There was, Your Honor, and minutes of the meeting were filed into the record of this matter.
Okay. And I think we indicated at that time that as a result of the public comment being held at that time that there would be no opportunity for public comment at this hearing since we had actually sort of gone out into the field and done it locally. Is that correct?
That is correct. That was in the public notice, and Commissioner Clay indicated the same at the hearing itself.
All right. Let the record reflect then that public comment has previously been held in this matter on August the 2nd in Richmond, Kentucky at a public hearing convened by this Commission, at which several members of the public did in fact comment. There is a transcript of those, not a transcript, but rather minutes of that publicly noticed meeting and public comment opportunity in the record in this case. Is that correct, Mr. Bertelson?
That is correct, Your Honor. And also, several people who spoke at the hearing also filed written comments, which were filed in the record of this matter as well.
Okay, very good. All right. Mr. Goodpastor and Mr. Bertelson, are there any outstanding motions or any procedural matters that we need to address before
None that I know of,
taking
Mr.
testimony? Okay.
Just briefly, Your Honor, we discussed prior to coming on here today, it is the Commission's staff's intent to call Mr. Kirby as if on cross as a witness in this matter to discuss whether or not East Kentucky Power has adequately dealt with the concerns that he raised at the hearing on the 2nd of August.
Okay, all right. You have any objection to that?
Mr. Chairman, since Mr. Kirby is not a party or an intervenor in the case and has not filed written testimony, pre-filed testimony before, I think actually calling him as a witness under oath to actually offer testimony and evidence is probably contrary to established commission procedure. We have no objection to issuing comments or having him make comments or whatever, not under oath, and put those in the record that way. If, in fact, it is the intent to call Mr. Kirby as a witness under oath to offer testimony, then yes, East Kentucky Power would offer an objection to it.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that objection. Let the record reflect the commission has considered the objection, will overrule it, and will permit the staff to call Mr. Kirby as if on cross for limited purpose of attempting to elicit testimony regarding the public hearing and the extent to which his concerns as articulated at that public hearing have been dealt with. I think in prior orders of the commission has made very clear that we want and expect each utility in these cases to make a good faith effort to address concerns that the public might raise with regard to any matter, and certainly I don't. The commission doesn't have any knowledge one way or the other that wasn't done in this case, but apparently the staff feels it appropriate to at least inquire, and so your objection is noted and overruled. And at the appropriate time, Mr. Burleson, you can go ahead and call Mr. Kirby. But let's go ahead, since East Kentucky bears the burden, and ask you, Mr. Goodpasture, to go ahead and call your first witness.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the first witness for East Kentucky Power will be Ms. Mary Jane Warner.
Ms. Warner, would you take the stand, please? Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, Mr. Goodpasture, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you state your name, please?
Mary Jane Warner.
What is your address, Ms. Warner?
I live at 27 Linway Drive in Winchester, Kentucky.
And what is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Kentucky, and I'm a licensed professional engineer in Kentucky.
Are you currently employed?
I am.
By whom?
East Kentucky Power Cooperative.
And what is your position with East Kentucky Power?
I'm currently the Manager of Engineering.
What are your duties and responsibilities in that capacity as East Kentucky's Manager of Engineering?
I'm responsible for the design and construction of and permitting of all transmission improvements and facilities and engineering services to the production areas, construction, and the cooperative at large.
Are you familiar with the Smith to West Garrett transmission line that is the subject of these proceedings?
Yes, I am.
Were the routing, location, and design performed under your direction and supervision?
They were.
Did you prepare written testimony that was submitted as an exhibit to East Kentucky Power's application in this case?
I did. Yes, I did.
Do you today adopt that testimony and incorporate that into the record as part of your testimony?
Yes.
Are you also familiar with the amendment that East Kentucky Power Cooperative filed to that application on August 15th of this year?
Yes, I am.
Could you briefly explain to the Commission what was amended in that particular filing and the reasons that those amendments had to be made?
Yes. As listed in the amendment to application, Exhibits 8.01 through 8.06 were revised. It was a shift in centerline. The preliminary design for this project had the areas of co-location 75 feet with the new centerline from the existing transmission line. As we began to develop the design, it became apparent that we needed to be a little bit farther away. So some of those areas moved to 125 feet away from the existing centerline, an increase of 50 feet. And that was because consideration for clearance for blowout. When the wind blows and displaces the conductor, it can decrease the clearance to unacceptable distances between the displaced conductor and the existing structures. And so when a more refined design was done, we determined that it was necessary to move the two center lines a little farther apart in a couple areas along the co-located portions of the project. We also, in that same amendment, needed to revise Exhibits 9.1 and 9.2 because PVA information was incorrect and listed a Mr. Roy Rogers as the owner of parcel 185, when in fact we found out at the local public hearing, August the 2nd, that Janet Whitaker was the correct owner there. So that correction was also made at that time. Yesterday, I discovered that we also had omitted from that amendment another co-location situation with an existing KU line where the center line had to be spaced out a little bit more. That was in about a 50-foot shift again for about 3/4 of a mile along the KU Fox to Brown line. So we have that exhibit, and I believe we will file that as a post-hearing amendment, and it will be a revision to Exhibit 8.07. One other item I'd like to mention is to request a correction to the minutes of the local public hearing that was held August the 2nd. At the bottom of the first page, it says that I stated that East Kentucky had determined it necessary to move the originally planned center line up to 125 feet. It actually is up to 50 feet from 75 feet to 125 feet. So I think that's just where the confusion came in, but it is a maximum move of 50 feet rather than the 125 feet.
Hold on just a second. Let's make sure that we get that, Ms. Warner. What page? You said it was on page 2?
Yes, it starts at the bottom of page 1 in the last paragraph, the second sentence. And at the very top of the second page,
okay.
Line up to 125 feet. It can either be from 75 to 125 or up to 50 feet.
Okay. Mr. Bertelson, do you have any problem or any concern with Ms. Warner's request that the minutes of the public hearing be amended as she's requested?
Normally, Your Honor, I'm not sure if we allow minutes to be amended.
Well, I can allow them to be amended, but I'm asking you, and that's what I'm going to do if you don't have any objection. What I'm saying is I want to make sure that that you agree that that was a misstatement or a mistake. If you don't agree, then tell me, and we'll deal with it.
Okay. I don't disagree with her recharacterization of what she said.
You conducted the hearing. You okay with that?
Right.
Okay. Let the record reflect then that Ms. Warner requested the minutes of the August 2nd, 2007 public hearing be amended as she is requested on page 2. And what we'll do is we'll just strike out the number 125 and insert in its place the number 50. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Pastor.
Ms. Warner, with either the shift in the center line of up to 50 feet that was contained in the amendment that was filed, and the shift that you just testified to that will be filed in a subsequent amendment, are there any additional property owners affected by those shifts in center line that were otherwise notified in this application?
No, there are not.
Okay. I believe that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bertelson, questions?
Yes, Your Honor. With regard to your testimony just a few moments ago, you said now with the change with the amended route, Janet Whitaker's property is going to be crossed now instead of a fellow named Roy Rogers, correct?
The same parcel will be crossed. The ownership information was incorrect.
Okay.
So the parcel impact isn't different, but there is a correction in the ownership. And we did have the opportunity to meet with her on the night of the local hearing. She came to the after-hearing discussion, and we were able to get the right information and get that corrected.
Okay.
So they understand what has happened and are informed about all the parts and pieces of the project.
And are you aware of any objection that she has to the line?
No, none was noted that night.
All right. So, from your previous testimony, you stated that essentially the transmission planning was done under your direction for this particular line, correct?
At that time, transmission planning was in my area of responsibility, and yes, it was done by someone else, but under my management, yes.
Okay. And you're aware of the exhibits that were filed with your pre-hearing testimony that were filed on May 22nd?
Yes.
Okay. And you're familiar with Warner Exhibit 2? And that's a selection of preferred route analysis? Okay. In that selection of preferred route analysis, how many different routes were examined for this transmission line project?
Well, the methodology begins with a study area. So I guess in that respect, they're practically an infinite number. The study area was about 175,000 acres, and it is an optimization program that actually compares land use data in that entire area to find the paths or the places where a transmission line will have least impact. So when you begin at that level, there really aren't a finite number of alternatives. The process is a refining process that then eventually nominates center lines to be considered with greater and greater detail of information collected and incorporated as you go. When you get down to the final analysis, we have a list, I think it's shown in Exhibit 10 that you all were discussing earlier. If we count across there, that's the number of alternatives, finite alternatives that actually made it to the final selection phases, which would be 16 are listed on Exhibit 10 that were put through the final scoring.
Okay. Which three routes eventually were rated the highest by the route selection analysis?
After the statistical comparison, there were three. I think they were ER, GR, and HR.
Okay.
Those were the designations of those particular alternatives.
Did East Kentucky do the line routing analysis in-house, or was a consultant hired to do it? Explain that process to me.
Okay. We used Photoscience Geospatial of Lexington to do data collection, some modeling and processing of information, and then the expert team at East Kentucky Power actually made the qualitative decisions and did the routing analysis. In terms of assessing that information, using it, making choices and decisions, that was our team of experts, interdisciplinary, which includes engineers, right-of-way agents, environmental experts, and so on. We used Photoscience to collect data and process information for us, run the models.
Okay. So, for example, say on pages 16 and 17 of the selection of preferred route analysis, the actual numerical values that were entered there, that was done by East Kentucky's in-house team or teams, correct?
Let me catch up with you just a moment. Page 16 and 17?
Yes, ma'am.
And which numbers are you asking about?
The numbers that appear under the different routes, say with regards to residences within the ROW, there's 0 is assigned for each of the
Right,
ones
the
on
field
page.
surveys, the counts in the field surveys and that sort of data, yes. They either acquired those through publicly available databases early in the process. Later on, as the process evolves, there's actually field survey done. So they went out into the field and counted those features.
Okay. Now, on Exhibit 10, and there's a copy of it posted on the wall over there for the folks here in the room to see as well, but you've got a copy of it there.
Yes.
The route as selected is made up of segments, correct?
Yes, as identified on Exhibit 10.
Yes, ma'am. And we can see that the line goes down. There's a long section 1. There's a section 2 that appears in dotted or dashed line format. What do the dots or dashed lines indicate on the map?
Okay, you can see in the legend on the lower right corner that the solid line is the proposed center line and dashed are alternative routes.
So the solid line is the route that was selected from the route selection analysis and mapped here for those purposes.
Yes, that is our proposed center line.
So as selected, the preferred route follows segments 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, and 14, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you explain, with regards to after segment 10 on the map, why it was that the route that follows segments 12 and 13 was selected over the route that would have included segment 11?
Well, the scoring ranked both of those routes in the three finalists. So those are the best scoring routes, meaning there's least impact overall, balancing all considerations, the engineering, the built, the natural environment, and they then were taken to expert judgment. There was about 0.05 of a point that separated those three alternatives. And on the southwest end of the project, those are the two differences, the track that follows 11 versus 12, 13, and 14. When those were taken to expert judgment, I think the primary consideration was the amount of rebuild. The greenfield for ER was 11.9 miles. The greenfield for GR was 12.9, and the greenfield for HR was 9 miles. Then you look at the rebuild, which is the co-locate amount was pretty much the same. If you look at the rebuild, ER was 7.9 miles, GR was 7.7 miles, and HR was 11.8. And that is illustrated on this map because that particular piece of the project is where a large rebuild opportunity was, in sections 12. So basically, HR was, although they scored very similarly and were the top three ranks, there was a significant amount of rebuild in HR that was seen as a very positive thing. And that's why it won out.
When you say rebuild, what do you mean? What do you mean by rebuild?
I'm sorry. Greenfield is where there is no transmission line and no easement. We basically go across a piece of land that's not yet affected by any transmission facility. Co-locate is where a center line is alongside an existing facility. Rebuild is where you tear down an existing facility and replace it with a new facility, either a double circuit or just replace it with a bigger line.
So when you're doing a rebuild, do you have to acquire new right-of-way for that?
You acquire, in this instance, the right-of-way will be wider, so we acquire some more right-of-way. Generally, it's an amended and expanded easement. So there's an existing easement that allows us to be there for that first project, or first facility. We will get a little bit wider easement and update the rights so that they're appropriate for the project that's being built.
So am I correct in restating what you said is that after everything was considered in the route selection analysis, you had these three routes, which were the primary ones that scored best through the analysis and the figures that were prepared. And the main factor that tilted sections 12 and 13 over 11 was that there was more opportunity for rebuild.
Yes, I think that's correct.
By how much? By how many miles?
The comparison between, let's see, let me look at the next best
This it would
one.
be GR and HR, wouldn't it?
Yes, GR and HR, there was the 9 miles of greenfield on HR, 12.6 for GR, 11.8 miles of rebuild for HR versus 7.7 for GR.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, on Exhibit 10, which is, again, the map showing all the route segments, can you describe the topography and the built environment at the point where route segment 11 would intersect the existing KU transmission line? I think it's indicated on there as a blue line.
Okay, this is where segment 11 crosses the existing KU line, the same one that's crossed by 13 just farther to the south.
Right.
Yes, I can.
Do you all have a map or anything that shows that?
Yes, I brought an exhibit that's a little bit more detailed than the overall map, Exhibit 10. I don't know if we have another copy of this or not, do we?
Thanks, Is it entitled Smith West Garrett 345 KV alternative segment 11 KU crossing vicinity?
I don't have that map here. I have the other one with the yellow overlay. So if you all have another
Give me a
copy of
copy of
that one,
that.
I can use
I
that.
don't think we have a copy of that.
I think that's what we're most interested in.
Okay,
seeing.
you can have that.
Let me show this.
I have a smaller version of that Ms. Warner can use. I think that's the same.
I think that's supposed to be showing the same thing. You don't have another.
We do not have another large one, no.
I guess I can.
Thank you.
Now, is that map just a small version?
Are you orienting?
Let's identify that one, Mr. Burleson, the former.
I think we'll mark this as Commission's Exhibit Number 1.
Not his map. Mr. Goodpasture, let me inquire, this map that he's about to offer, is this a map that is of evidence in the record?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
That has not been filed as an exhibit in the application.
Are you comfortable with its use? I mean, you...
Yes, I have no objection.
It came from your records, so you all prepared it, I guess, didn't you?
We did.
Okay.
And have no objection.
Okay.
And this is something I requested of Mr. Goodpasture yesterday.
Okay.
So he had a fair opportunity to give us something to look at. Ms. Warner, I'm going to hand you what I've marked as Commission's Exhibit Number 1. Can you identify that for the record?
This is basically a blow-up of the map on Exhibit 10 down on the near Highway 127, where segment 11, one of the alternative segments, number 11, crosses an existing KU transmission facility. Two lines actually side by each. And this is just simply a blow-up or an inset of that portion of the project.
Okay. Is that the same KU line that is crossed by segment 13 on map 10?
Yes, crosses it farther to the south
Okay.
on segment 13.
Can you describe, from that map, can you describe the topography and the built environment that is directly below where that segment 11 would cross the existing KU line?
It's generally rolling, appears to be farmland, probably cropped. There's a large tract that appears to be farmed, and then there's a subdivision of property kind of around the perimeter of what must have been the parent tract.
Okay.
With a developed road. I didn't mention that, but there is a developed road up into an area that is lined then by some of these parcels.
So a subdivision underlies where those would intersect?
Yes, there is subdivided property all around that area, and then there's also one larger tract that's crossed by our project, our proposed center line, that appears to be used for farming.
Yes, Your Honor, we would offer that as Commission's Exhibit 1 into the record.
Okay, Mr. Goodpasture's indicated he has no objection to it, so let it be filed with record, made an exhibit. Commission, are you finished asking her questions about that?
Yes, Your Honor. You want to take a look at it?
Yeah, why don't you hand it up here to us and let us be looking at it while you proceed. Thanks.
So, explain to me more.
Mr. Burleson, just a second. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Why don't you hand this to Ms. Warner and ask her to take a red pencil or some highlighter or something and just circle or mark where proposed segment 11 intersects with the existing KU transmission. Now, I'm pretty sure we found it there, but I want to make sure.
You could, Ms. Warner, just mark on that map where the KU line would intersect. So let the record reflect that the witness is running a blue pen on Commission's Exhibit 1, indicating where the proposed segment 11 crosses the existing KU line.
Okay, thank you.
You see that?
Can we see it? Can we see it okay? Or
I believe so.
can the circuit court see it or the Court of Appeals see it?
Got reading glasses.
Not sure if it comes through in a scan, but it's visible to our eyes.
Okay.
Is that sufficient?
Yeah, thank you. And while you're getting back to your seat, Ms. Warner, let me inquire on behalf of the Commission. Is the proposed segment 11 the red line that is designated on this map?
That's correct.
Okay. And the two KU lines are the royal blue lines?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Warner, we go back to your rebuilds, explanation and so forth. Is 12 and 13 rebuilds, or is that new line?
On Exhibit 10, if you follow segment 10, rather, to where the split is
Yes.
between 11 and 12, you can see that there is a dashed line. It shows up a little bit under the red line, and it
Okay,
goes all
yes.
the way down past the 12 to a point near Lancaster. See the white box?
Yes.
That's where it deviates from the rebuild and begins Section 13 over to the West Garrett substation.
Okay. And 11 would be new line?
And 11, correct, is from that junction point or that Y on over to where it intersects with segment 14.
Okay. I see. So essentially, that 13 on Exhibit 10 is new line, 12 is rebuild.
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Burr.
Did the court reporter's tape turn? Okay. And just for clarity's sake, with regard to the subdivision that is indicated on Commission's Exhibit 1 there, is that a platted subdivision?
Yes, I believe that information came to us through the PVA.
Okay, so it's a plat that's on file?
I believe
with
so.
local PVA? All right. Now, explain for the Commission's understanding a little bit better, what is the Kentucky transmission line siting model?
That is the Georgia EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, and GTC, Georgia Transmission Company, developed a methodology for routing transmission lines. They used stakeholder input in Georgia to be able to add weights to the model, emphasis for features that the local stakeholders, people throughout Georgia, felt were most important and how they relatively should rank in the consideration of impact of a transmission line. And so the first time we used the model with the Georgia weights. We determined, and the Commission, in fact, urged us to develop a Kentucky stakeholders version of the methodology for use specifically in Kentucky. And so East Kentucky Power and EON hosted a stakeholders workshop in Lexington. It was facilitated and sponsored by EPRI and GTC, the same teams that did the original work in Georgia. And so we tuned the weighting in the model with input from Kentucky stakeholders. And the result was the model that has Kentucky weights in it.
When was that?
February of '06, I believe.
February of 2006?
Yes. So let me check that for sure.
While you're checking that, was a copy of this Kentucky transmission line siting model filed into the record of this matter?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't believe so, Mr. Burleson.
Maybe I could refer you to East Kentucky's answers to staff's data requests. I believe it's tab 2.
Yes, Mr. Burleson, I was incorrect. That in East Kentucky's response to staff data request number 2, a CD was filed with that citing report.
So that CD contains the report, correct?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that report?
Yes.
Did you have a part in the creation of the report or the process that led to its creation?
The report, yes, the report was generated by Photoscience. They were a contractor to East Kentucky and EON. We hosted the event, but we did not direct the event or facilitate it. We depended on Photoscience and the original EPRI GTC team to do that. We were observers that day. We participated as experts in only the engineering environment, and then we had observers in the other rooms. And then Photoscience took the information from the stakeholder workshop. They did some testing, and then they issued the report. So the project team really issued the report.
Who were some of the other stakeholders who participated in that event?
They're listed, I believe, in the report itself, and there's a large number of them. But I can characterize them as representatives from private sector, from, for instance, the Farm Bureau was invited, different ag organizations, home builders. There were folks from the Kentucky Heritage Council there, the SHPO's office, State Historic Preservation Officer's office, environmental representatives like from the U.S. Forest Service, Kentucky Nature Preserves, and so on.
And there were other utilities?
Yes, certainly.
Represented? Okay. And so you stated something about an earlier case. That this model has been used in an earlier transmission line siting case?
Yes, several, I believe, by East Kentucky Power in the Warren transmission case.
That was the case before the commission?
It was.
And I think you kind of touched on how it was used in this case earlier. Can you just describe briefly again the methodology, how it works to come up with the route that ultimately the utility believes is proper?
The methodology, the intent of the methodology is to do very comprehensive evaluation of data as objectively as possible, with weightings and valuation that is determined by as much public input as possible and is applied consistently. So you start with a very large study area between the two, or surrounding the two endpoints you want to connect with a transmission line. And there's land use data that's used in that entire area, which basically provides information, and with the rankings lets you know whether or not it's a suitable place or an unsuitable place for a transmission line. The modeling in the early phases optimizes paths between the 2 points, hitting the most suitable places for transmission lines. So that generates macro corridors, and then from that, alternative corridors. Then after you have alternative, in this instance, after we had alternative corridors, RUS held a scoping workshop in Richmond to talk about any environmental issues or concerns the public might have before we proceeded. Then we had 2 independent routing teams at East Kentucky that went out and developed some center lines for alternative route corridors. And they did that in the field. These are experts, our engineers, and others on the team right away, and environmental folks again. And they developed a range of alternatives for the center lines of corridors that would be taken to our open houses. They came back to the office, they compared them, contrasted them, and developed a set of route alternative corridors, rather. And we put about a half-mile wide corridor around the greenfield ones, and I think only 1,000 feet maybe around the rebuilds. Took those to the public in a series of open houses, actually 2, that were held in the local areas, and collected folks' input and comments about those at the open house. You take those back to the office and refine them further into some final alternatives, and then they were put through the statistical comparison and scoring back to the methodology, and ranked then, and that's what you see on Exhibit 10 in the top left corner. And then the procedure from there is to take the best 3 and move them to expert judgment, where factors are considered that are not so quantifiable or that can be balanced, I guess, with expert judgment, and then we select a preferred alternative.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you actually had 2 teams of East Kentucky employees working to make the route selection.
To make the corridor selection, the alternative route corridor. The nomenclature gets a little confusing here, but the idea is to get some paths that have been confirmed in the field by experts within those alternative corridors that have been generated as the best places to put transmission lines in the study area.
Okay. Why do you use 2 teams?
Just so that you can get an independent look at it. You send one team out and they go do their work, you send another team out and they go do their work, then they come in, 2 heads are better than 1.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that either team's recommendation is made by teams of equivalently skilled
Yes.
experts?
Yeah. The teams generally have a senior engineer with transmission line experience, with a lot of transmission line experience actually, right-of-way agents, and then they review with environmental input and so on. And then those folks all come together and they have to come to a consensus about which of their ideas are the best to take forward for scoring.
Okay. I'm going to refer you back to Warner Exhibit 2, and I'm going to have you look specifically at pages 8 and 9 of that. That's the selection of preferred route analysis. And there's a figure 9 and a figure 10. Figure 9 is on page 8, figure 10 is on page 9. What does figure 9 on page 8 of Warner Exhibit 2 show?
Figure 9 on page 8 is those are the corridor center lines, the route corridor center lines that each of the teams generated. So I think they're distinguished between Team 1 and Team 2 by the red and the blue lines.
Now, I'll ask you to look at figure 10 on page 9. What does figure 10 show, or purport to show?
This is the result of their consensus meeting. In other words, they sat down with all their work in the field, and this is what they came up with as the alternatives that should move forward to the scoring process.
Okay. I'll have you look back again then at figure 9, and maybe you can look at figure 9 and figure 10 sort of together if you fold the page up a little bit. On figure 9, it appears there's at the bottom left-hand corner of figure 9, there's sort of a rectangular-shaped space, which I believe is that the space that's on Exhibit 10, bounded by segments 12, 13, and 11?
Yes, I think I see what you mean. It's sort of a loop, and it's bounded, yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, in Figure 9, there's a blue line running through the center, roughly through the center of that area, and connecting over to, I guess, what's part of segment 11 on Exhibit 10. But that blue line doesn't appear on Figure 10. Now, was that blue line on Figure 9, was that part of the route corridor center lines for Team 2?
Yes, it was.
So if that line had been chosen, would that, or if that line had been the route that was selected as one of the preferred alternatives, that would have been roughly in the center of what's now bounded by segments 12, 13, and 11 on Exhibit 10, correct?
Yes, roughly.
Okay. Do you know why that part of the line was eliminated from Figure 10, from the merged alternative route corridor center lines?
I think I do. If you'll look at the farthest to the right, or the closest to where this splits off between 11 and 12, that's about a quarter-mile parallel, a greenfield route that's about a quarter-mile away from a rebuild opportunity. Just in terms of local impact, that's an inferior option. It's all greenfield and doesn't take any advantage of any rebuild. I believe there was actually also a listed historic structure in there somewhere that would have been adversely affected by a greenfield route that is represented by that blue line. So, in sitting down and looking at the options there, with those three options, there's one that's significantly inferior for those reasons, and so it was not nominated to move forward in the scoring process.
Now, you mentioned historic site. What did you mean by historic site that would have been impacted by the line?
Early in the process, the information that we gathered from the stakeholders, well, first of all, just in the standard methodology, properties or structures that are listed on the National Register for Historic Places are included as avoidance areas, places where it is least desirable to put a transmission line within, I think, a 1,500-foot radius. That doesn't mean that you can't put the transmission line there or that you might not end up with one there. It means it's to be avoided if possible. So those are incorporated in the macro corridor generation and the alternative corridor generation. This Kentucky stakeholder workshop also resulted in eligible structures being a very undesirable place, not as high as listed structures, but also a very undesirable place to put a transmission line. And so that information is gathered from the Kentucky Heritage Council. They have a database of all structures that have been evaluated and are considered eligible. And so that information, per the Kentucky stakeholder input, is used in the generation of those corridors. As we move through the refinement process, then, when we get down to these alternative route corridors, we send experts, in this case cultural resources analysts and Palmer Engineering, out to survey those areas and investigate and evaluate all possible cultural sites.
You said the data is maintained by the Kentucky Heritage Council, or those?
Or the eligible.
For the
The
eligible.
listed that's a federal database, the listed
Okay.
structures.
Do you know, is the data that the Kentucky Heritage Council maintains on the eligible sites, is it reliable? How often is it updated?
At the stakeholder workshop, that was discussed, and it was determined that was the appropriate source. And it's the place, it's where we go to get that kind of data to be able to consider it early enough in the process, and consistently across the study area.
Again, referring back to Warner Exhibit 2 on page 29, there is under regulatory issues on that page, there's a figure 15 labeled location of a potentially eligible structure. Was there a potentially eligible structure located near to the routes that were examined in this case?
What, would you repeat that, please?
Was there a structure that was potentially eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places near to one of the routes that were examined?
Well, there's one designated on Figure 15. It's the small inset here that says that. The print is so small I can barely see it. But approximate location of potentially eligible National Historic Register structure.
Okay.
Yes, it's marked by that star on the map.
The red star?
Yes, sir.
And where in relation to, I guess, segment 11 is that red star?
It's, it's in the first third or so of the length of segment 11. It's just south of it.
Okay. With regard to that potentially eligible National Historic Register structure, do you know from the teams that examined it, do you know what that structure is?
I may need to confirm that with someone here in just a moment, if that would be acceptable. Make sure I have the right spot.
Certainly. If you need to refer to.
Sherman, is it appropriate for me to, may I step down, or shall I ask someone to help me confirm here that I'm looking at the right spot?
What, you're referring to a map there that you have with you?
Well, I have a couple maps. That's what I'm trying to do, is make sure I have the right thing. I believe that is
You're welcome
Site
to-
71.
No, if you need to confirm something, we'd rather have correct testimony than speculative, so if you need to confirm something with somebody, please feel free to do so.
I want to make sure I'm looking at the right map, if that's acceptable. Thank you very much. I had the right spot. There was a little confusion about the location of it. That is in our cultural report. That is Site 71. It is a federal stone house, and the confusion that I was having is that in the report at this stage of the project, on page 29 of the selection of preferred route, it was listed as a potentially eligible, I think, let me read that somewhere, a potentially eligible site. When we actually did the on-the-ground survey, we discovered that the house is listed. It was listed in 1983, and the database with the Kentucky Heritage Council had it in the wrong location. And so at this stage of the process, it was considered potentially eligible, and then our field work confirmed that it in fact had been listed. It's a one-story, five-bay, side gable federal stone house, listed in 1983, located on the west side of Jess Ray Road, north of Kentucky 39, and facing Sugar Creek. And the note that's made here on the location question in the cultural report, the location of this house was recorded in the KHC GIS database as being the residence south of this house. During the survey, it was found the correct location was the house north of the one designated in the database. So there was some confusion about the status and the location of this particular site.
Okay.
But that's where it is. It's just to the south of that portion of segment 11.
So in the research process that led to the route selection analysis, it was initially identified as possibly being listed, and then you all did further research and found that it was actually listed.
Yes.
Okay. And do you know that it is still standing today as of today's date? I mean, it wasn't destroyed by fire or torn down. Obviously, it's on the historic register, so.
Yes, I think we had we actually did a visual on it the day of the local hearing, which would have been August 2nd. So as of August 2nd, it was still standing. I guess I can't say with certainty for today.
All right. You attended the August 2nd public hearing in Richmond, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you actually gave testimony or gave public comment that day on behalf of East Kentucky, correct?
Yes, just basic overview of the project.
Okay. Did you stay and listen to the other people who spoke that day?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Were you aware, so I guess you heard the concerns that were expressed by different members of the Kirby family with regard to the transmission line?
Yes, I did.
What were some of those concerns that were expressed by members of the family?
I'll just take these in order. We have an internal document that basically summarized for our use the public hearing and generally who spoke about what. Mr. Brian Kirby talked about concerns of the line, our project dividing his farm into 4 quadrants because of the existing KU line there and the approximate 90-degree crossing of our line over that one. He had some concern about the right-of-way numbers that were used for acquisition in our cost estimates and thought that those seemed low. He talked about the potential for proposed development and how it would be impacted by our, proposed development meaning how we had classified proposed developments in our routing selection process and so on. Wondered if it was appropriate. He had an idea about another place where we could cross, I think this is where we could cross the KU line, where there would be fewer property owners impacted and so on. In each of these instances, we have the follow-up, which generally was a conversation that night. Our personnel were available and met with the folks that were there and spoke about these different issues and discussed them with those people that night. Sheila Kirby Miller talked about avoiding the family farm altogether, but if possible following the perimeter of the property. Our personnel talked to her about that being cost prohibitive and unacceptable from an engineering standpoint. Joanna Kirby talked about changing the look of the farm and the impact to development potential, asking us to reconsider or consider rerouting the line. Robert Miller spoke, and he also presented his comments in writing, asking that we route the lines along property perimeters. Chad Smith also spoke regarding the same tract about fragmenting the farm and the environmental impact on ecosystems that their family had tried to foster there, requesting that the line not be placed on the family's farm. We had folks there who could talk about the routing process, how we deal with right-of-way acquisition and valuation. We talked a bit about electric and magnetic fields, associated transmission lines and concerns there, the clearing and maintenance of vegetation, and how we reclaim an area following the clearing. And our environmental expert was also there to provide information and discuss the environmental surveys we had done and how they were incorporated into the routing process. In addition to the Kirby's family members, we also talked with Janet Whitaker. That's the property owner where we had to verify ownership. And then there were representatives there for parcels 343 and 344. There was some concern about the location on the property where we crossed because it was a good house seat. We spoke with those folks and talked to them about how we had arrived at that location. I think we actually received survey permission from that property owner that night.
Okay.
But yes, that's our summary of the comments and the interaction that evening.
Okay. And were you there at the meeting that was after the public meeting that we had?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So, and you observed the conversations?
I observed and participated a bit.
Okay. So is it accurate to say that East Kentucky answered further questions of members of the public who attended that after meeting?
Yes, I think that was very fair to say.
Is it your belief that East Kentucky adequately addressed the concerns that were raised by the members of the public at that public hearing at the after meeting?
I think we adequately addressed them in terms of providing information and explanation for how we had selected the route and how we had arrived at that decision. We did not change the route as a result of those conversations, and did not meet their request directly to put it someplace else or to follow the perimeter. So I think we did address them, but we didn't change the route of the project.
On Exhibit 10, which, can you tell, like, from on Exhibit 10, where the Kirby property, the Kirby farm property would be on that map? And can you describe for the commission on that map where it would be?
Describe where it is?
Yes.
If you look at the far left, in the lower left corner, West Garrett, the yellow square there, and work back 14 into 13, you can see the black line there, which is the highway. And then our red line crosses both the black line and then that kind of double-dashed purplish line. That area is the Kirby property.
Now, you mentioned that Sheila Kirby Miller had suggested routing the line around the perimeter of the Kirby farm property.
Yes.
Would it be possible for East Kentucky to do that?
Possible, yes. Reasonable, no.
And why would it not be reasonable?
The cost is extreme. We would estimate the following the perimeter of the property requires that you put dead ends, which are places where the tension breaks in the line, and you have to basically hold back in one direction with guys and then hold back in the other direction with guys. It's a severe angle that requires a much stronger structure there to be able to change direction of the line. At 345 kV, the number of dead ends required for this would be $500,000 to $750,000. That sounds very high, but it's very realistic considering this type of construction. Currently, the number of structures that would be on the Kirby farm would be 3 two-pole structures. In this event, there might be as many as 11 to 13 poles, and certainly guys that would clutter the area. If you look at the perimeter on the Kirby property, and I don't think that you can see it in the level of detail on Exhibit 10, there's a wooded area also that's along the perimeter, probably the southern corner of the property, and to follow that you'd have to do a considerable amount more clearing. Basically, it's very costly. It would be very unsightly, both for this property and anyone in the area, and it would probably impact 2 acres or so of land if you count the guy space compared to a very minimal amount of footprint for just those 6 poles. It's basically it's bad engineering practice as well.
I'm going to hand you a copy of what I've marked as, or had marked as Commission's Exhibit 2. Yeah, here are copies for the commissioners as well. Do you all have copies of this?
Now, I've got a copy. Has Mr. Goodpasture seen it?
Yes. And emailed Mr. Goodpasture a copy of this a couple of days ago. Yes,
The same one.
Same as we went past.
With the same one.
I think so. Yeah, same as we went past.
I need a copy as well, please.
Or I'm going to hand you a copy of what I've marked as Commission's Exhibit number 2. Are you familiar with that map? Mr. Goodpasture showed you a copy of something similar to that?
Yes, something similar.
What is that map a map of?
Say I am.
I'm going to pass out copies to the Kirbys as well. This
This is the Kirby property on Route 27. I believe it's parcel 353.
the numbers on this upside down?
Yes.
Where is north oriented on this map?
With the tagline here on the bottom, Public Service Commission, August 17th, north is up.
Okay. On the maps that were filed by East Kentucky, where was north oriented?
It may have been somewhat skewed. Our objective is to have the maps read from left to right so that you can work through them. So there may be a difference in orientation for north, but it will be marked, I think.
Okay.
Considering the way the parcel numbers are, if the parcel numbers are right side up, then north would be straight up from those.
Okay. And you said the parcel indicated as number 353. That is what you believe to be the Kirby farm property?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And again, you stated, tell me again, with the current design of the route, how many towers would be necessary to put on their property?
3 two-pole structures. So these are 2 single poles with a connecting cross arm, and there would be 3 of those type structures, so 6 poles altogether. One, if everybody's drawing is oriented correctly with north up on this Exhibit 2, it would be coming in from the right side as it comes onto the property roughly in that area, close to the existing KU line, which is those 2 turquoise kind of lines, and then another structure somewhere there as it exits and crosses Highway 27.
And then if, as you described, if somehow the route was changed to follow the perimeter of the property, you said that there could be as many as 11 structures?
Yes, you would, as the line comes onto the property there to the right, I'm assuming you would follow that property line down into the corner, and you'd have to cross the KU line there. And then there would be an angle again, and then going along the, I guess, the westernmost boundary in that area, and then back to the red line. And the other direction would not be, it would be longer, plus there's the home is located up in that area where that little jag is to the northwest.
So it would
So assuming you wouldn't want to go that direction on the perimeter.
Okay, so would placing the line around the perimeter have an effect on adjacent property owners?
Certainly visually it would. We would try, I guess, to keep guys on the property. There would be lots of them. But visually, the dead ends have to be 3-pole structures. So instead of the 2-pole structure, when you turn a sharp angle, there have to be 3 poles in that structure. So you're going to have a lot of poles in the air, a lot of guys coming down, a lot of jumpers, just a cluttered look in general. So visually, yes, certainly it would. And then cutting the trees along that southwestern boundary would, I suppose, have another impact visually.
If you'll forgive me for just a moment, Mr. Commissioner.
While you're thinking, let me ask her while it's fresh on my mind, is your answer presumes that the rest of segment 13 would not change. In other words, what you're saying would have to be done with regard to the Kirby property line assumes that the rest of segment 13 from the corner of their property back to the intersection of segment 13 and 12 would not change. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. This is a this is a tunnel view at a very, very small segment on a very large project, and the project is routed all 35 miles, not incrementally, piece by piece. So I assumed from the conversation we were talking just specifically about the Kirby tract. It would be a complete abandonment of the methodology to just start reworking little segments as we go. We try to, during the process of working in the open house and with property owners, if there are modifications or accommodations that can be made and not affect neighboring property owners, we work those as long as we possibly can.
But your alternative routes, in fact, relies upon consideration of route segments, doesn't it?
They are components that are evaluated all together in the end-to-end route. But that's really for clarification. We don't evaluate, for instance, just segment 12 and just segment 11. Those are simply markers so that we know which pieces we're talking about in the combination of routes, because you combine different segments over and over to make those overall routes and score them against each other.
Okay, all right.
Ms. Warner, I have a question on the first map, which I think is Exhibit 10 on the wall. What's the purple area?
The purple area is those are the combined alternative corridors that were generated by the computer modeling that represent the emphasis on the built, combined emphasis on the built, the natural, and the engineering environments. So that's the area that the computer modeling selected as the best place to put a transmission line by land use.
Thank you. Another question, if you don't mind, on Exhibit 10, where segment 12 and 13 meet, they are not on this little map that we're looking at. That little jig there, 12 and 13, is that before the Kirby property?
Yes, yes. 12 and 13, where 12 and 13 meet is over there just above Lancaster, and the Kirby property on Exhibit 10 is over where the purple dashed line and the black line representing Highway 27 are close together.
Okay.
The transfer between Exhibit 2 and the new Exhibit, Commission Staff Exhibit 2 and EKPC Exhibit 10, the turquoise lines there are represented by the purple dashed lines on Exhibit 10. And you can see designation for US 27, that curve that follows along, or the road frontage for the Kirby property. Then that's the black line on Exhibit 10.
Okay, thank you.
Is there going to be a tie-in between this transmission line and the Lancaster substation?
No, there will not. These are electrically, they're two separate circuits on the same structures.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Warner, I have another question. All right, well, the poles or the towers or structures for Section 12 and maybe on back lower, are they larger than segment 13 and 14? Said something about two circuits on the same pole.
They are the same configuration, but taller because of the clearance required for the two structures.
Okay.
But they're the same. They look the same in terms of the two poles with arms at the top, but they will they'll carry more wires, so they'll be taller.
Thank you.
Yeah, go
Does the
ahead.
Commission have any further questions? I think if not, I think that's all the questions I have for Ms. Warner.
But just a second, you have any other questions, Mr. Cross?
I do. I have one. In your all's territory, in which you share a lot with Kentucky Utilities, do you have a lot of line crossings such as going to happen in this situation of you all crossing KU or KU crossing yours?
We do. In fact, we cross TVA's lines, AEP, Synergy to the north, certainly EON, the old LG&E system, and KU, and a myriad of distribution lines. All transmission and distribution lines cross frequently as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Clark, any questions?
Actually, one further point, Your Honor. I believe one of the issues that was raised with regard to the routing methodology was that, and I'll refer again back to the report, which is your exhibit, Warner Exhibit number 2, on page 17. There's a table 2 showing alternative route features and normalized comparisons.
Okay, just give me just a moment, please.
Okay.
Is the selection of preferred route?
Yeah, select your exhibit, Warner Exhibit number 2, the selection of preferred route report.
Okay, and it's, I'm not on the right page somehow. And
Page
it's
17.
17.
Oh, 17, I'm sorry. Yes, now I'm in.
Okay, and about, on the left-hand side, there's a table 2, and it, 3 or 4 lines down, it says proposed residential developments.
Yes,
Okay. And again, the routes that were rated the highest were GR, ER, and HR, is that correct?
yes,
And is the Kirby property the one indicated as, the line that would cross over the Kirby property, is that the one that's the route HR?
well, it's segments 12 and 13, and they may be incorporated in several routes, but yes, I think HR, that's a distinguishing feature of HR. I'd have to check that for sure, but I think that's correct.
And in this table, for route HR, under proposed residential developments, the number indicated there is 2. Correct. Does that indicate that there were 2 proposed residential developments along this route?
In all of HR, when the PVA office was contacted and asked for information regarding proposed developments that had been filed with them or submitted to them, this is the information we got.
Okay. And for GR, the number is 3? Is that
On this
correct?
table, that's correct.
And for ER, the number is 3 as well?
That's correct.
Is it correct to say that routing a line over a subdivision is preferred or not preferred with regard to the methodology?
Across a proposed development that would be an area you'd choose not to go through if you could.
Okay. So,
But it is weighted with all these other factors. It's not a deciding factor. It's one of the factors that goes into balancing the impact of the project and results in a score.
but all things being equal, if one line had a score of 3 for proposed residential developments and a score of 2 for proposed residential developments, you would prefer to choose the one that has 2 as opposed to 3 under the methodology?
The count influences the score, and the weighted score is what actually gets compared, and it's how the stakeholder input went with the ranking. So yes, the stakeholders of Kentucky said that if it's an area that is, assuming there's nothing else there that's more impacted or that's less desirable to impact, then a proposed subdivision is less desirable than some other areas.
Okay, now when you say proposed residential developments or proposed subdivision, are you talking about subdivisions that have been platted?
This is, the way we get this information is to contact the local PVA and ask them for, if it's already been platted, it's in the courthouse, and it should show up in the PVA information. If it has not been platted, but it may be in process, then we contact the PVA office, or the local planning and zoning office to get that information.
So is it possible that in route GR and ER, that one or more of the 3, or do you know in routes GR or ER, was one of the 3 proposed residential developments a subdivision that had been platted but not filed with the PVA office?
I don't know the specifics of the proposed residential developments. These 3 are the 2. I couldn't tell you where they are and specifically the names and so on.
is it proper under the Kentucky transmission line siting model, is it proper under that methodology to use a subdivision plat that has been proposed to the planning and zoning but not yet filed in the local PVA office?
Yes, it's intended, when it's filed, we either get it through the PVA, or if it's in process with planning and zoning, we pick it up that way. So the request is made of the local planning and zoning office to supply us with any information about proposed residential developments that have been filed with them or submitted. I'm not sure the technical term there, but filed or submitted with local planning and zoning, so that we can know about those projects that are in process.
Okay. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Warner, I've got a few questions I want to ask you, please. It appears from, if I'm reading, and I'm referring to Exhibit 10, if I'm reading the route statistics matrix correctly, and assuming that the three final alternatives were HR, GR, and ER, am I correct about that?
Yes, sir.
It appears to me, you may have stated this, but it appears to me that of the three, HR received the lowest rank vis-a-vis GR and ER. Am I correct about that?
Yes, you are.
When I say the lowest rank, I mean the third, if they were ranked 1, 2, and 3, HR received the rank of 3.
Yes.
And so, in terms of the cumulative rank, alternative GR was the best, alternative ER was the second best, and alternative HR, which is the proposed route, was third.
There was a spread of .05 points between those three, but you're exactly right. GR was .35, ER .39, and HR .40.
And then, right, and I think you said that before, and then you said previously in your testimony, you explained to us, and I didn't quite understand what you were saying. You explained to us why, even though HR was the lowest ranked of the three, it was chosen. Would you tell us what you said again, please, and be as specific as you can be?
Okay. The three best routes, and this is in accordance with the EPRI-GTC methodology, the three best routes are not, well, some number of best routes are chosen and nominated for, that move forward into expert judgment. And we need to find that probably in the report. I can refer you to one of these exhibits. Give me just a moment, please. On page 28 of the selection of preferred route, which I think is Warner Exhibit 2,
Yes.
there is a discussion about the expert judgment phase, and it includes the comparison of GR, ER, and HR. It includes the more intangible factors that were considered, which is the purpose of expert judgment: visual issues, community, right-of-way schedule, construction, maintenance, accessibility, and regulatory, and describes what was considered in each of those categories. And you can see that under visual issues, they all scored the same. Under community issues, HR scored a little better. In right-of-way schedule, HR a little better. In construction, maintenance, accessibility, they were all the same. And in regulatory issues, HR was a little better. And the reason for that was the advantage that rebuilding provides in those three areas.
Advantage, explain what you mean by the advantage of rebuild.
Community issues, if you're tearing down a line instead and replacing it with a line, less impact to the community than greenfield, which is the impact, the additional impact of ER and GR over HR. Although on a balanced basis, they scored very closely, so closely they might be considered equal.
Well,
The rebuild opportunity on HR made it the preferred alternative.
Okay, well, that's the next question that I've got for you, because that's, I guess, where my principal confusion is. If you look at Exhibit 10, and I'm looking at the matrix, the route statistics matrix in the box in the top left-hand corner. When you look at the engineering side of it, it appears, if I'm reading this right, that the miles of rebuild with existing transmission line for HR is only, is that two tenths? No, that can't be 2 tenths. What is 0.02?
That's the score, which is the normalized number to make the statistical comparison.
So that is a score, that is not miles.
Right, that's right. The miles I gave you before, which indicated, and I'm going to estimate here, around 2 miles more rebuild on HR than ER and GR. Yeah. HR has, let's see, the rebuild, it has about 3.6 miles less greenfield than GR, and it has 2.9 miles less greenfield than ER.
Okay, let's do it another way,
Okay.
because my mind's pretty simple. Let's talk about the number of miles of rebuild for HR. Let's just do it. Let's try to dumb it down for me. Number of miles of rebuild for HR.
11.8.
Okay. For GR.
7.7.
Okay. And then ER.
7.9.
And what are we rebuilding? We're going to a 345 kV. What have we got now?
We're tearing down a 69 kV line and putting 2 circuits back on the same structures. So we still electrically
You're
have
still
the
gonna
new
keep the-
345 and the old 69 kV,
The old
yes.
69, okay.
Just using that same path.
Okay. Okay, now let's talk about, so clearly in East Kentucky's mind, the extra, looks like about 4 miles of rebuild on HR, on Route HR, sort of tipped the scale. Is that what we're saying? I mean, is that a fair characterization?
When you put the 3 routes together and looked at their scores, they were very, very similar. Was there any advantage in any of those categories for rebuild? And the answer is yes, and it tipped the scales.
Okay, let's talk about project cost.
Okay?
Now, if I'm looking again at the engineering, well, let's see here. Can I assume that the project cost box in the engineering environment section of that matrix takes into consideration, well, it says total project cost, so that's not just from an engineering standpoint, that's the total project.
That's the number we're using to make comparison among these alternatives. So it's
for the total
consistently
project.
applied, yes, for the total line project.
And now, if I'm reading the box, the values correctly, Route HR of the 3 appears to score the worst with respect to total project costs.
It is, I think approximately $1.2 million more expensive than I don't remember which other one it is, but yes, it is more expensive than ER or GR.
How was the cost factor? I mean, it seems to me we have a situation where HR is $1.2 million more expensive than the next best alternative, which clearly is a negative for, I would think, from East Kentucky's standpoint for the HR route.
It's more expensive, but not necessarily a negative.
Well, okay.
Acquiring-
Explain what you mean.
Okay, acquiring expanded and amended easements is much faster and much easier generally than acquiring greenfield easements. So there's cost in the schedule, and the ability to move ahead on that and get easements quickly is an advantage. So that offsets it. The acceptance of a project versus in the community issues of a rebuild project versus a greenfield project is better with a rebuild. The regulatory issues, the Commission's orders have very clearly stated that rebuild is a much more desirable option than a greenfield site. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of value discussion and decision that goes into this expert judgment phase.
Okay.
So, if you just talk only dollars, or if you just talk, only one aspect, then it is more expensive for certain. But those other things also affect cost and schedule and the success of the project.
Well, but is the issue with regard to having to obtain easements, greenfield easements, is that not factored in to the total project cost estimate along with everything else?
The actual cost of the right-of-way, yes. Any delays related to the time it takes to get the right-of-way, no. That's not as tangible. These are not estimates that are prepared individually for each of these options. They're very comparable numbers. They're standard numbers that are applied to all alternatives so that you can preserve the comparison that you want to keep. You really are just looking at the physical line on the land with these alternatives and not some of the intangibles. That's what expert judgment, that's what that phase is for.
And when was this project scheduled to begin?
To begin,
Assuming the commission approves it in some format, one alternative or the other, when is the
it'll
project?
begin immediately. In fact, on the rebuild section, as we announced at the local hearing on August 2nd, we've actually begun to negotiate with folks on some of the rebuild section. There's a piece, there's a 69 piece that if we don't have it torn down and replaced by the winter of '08, then we will lose the window to be able to take it out to rebuild it. The system grows, the load grows. We can have that segment out until the system load gets to be a certain point, and then it's too much risk to have it out for the duration of time we need to rebuild it. And that's all planned in the project schedule. It's a low-risk activity for us because it's an existing easement. We already have a line there, and we've started making contacts and moving ahead. But certainly we will begin immediately in earnest if the commission issues a certificate.
What section is that rebuild you were talking?
It's the 69 kV Newby to Lancaster, which would be on your Exhibit 10. You can see Newby, the little block for segment number 9, that white block that's immediately under it, that's Newby. And then Lancaster, of course, is in the lower left, where the other white block is, down at the end of Section 12.
But I mean, you're going to have to obtain greenfield easements at several points in the 35.6 mile line, aren't you?
Yes.
And so, I mean, I guess it's possible that having to obtain a greenfield easement by condemnation, say on the north northern end, closer to the Smith plant, on the northern end of the project, could delay the project as to the same degree that Greenfield easements by condemnation could delay it on the southern end.
Yes,
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I may need to explain a little bit more. This rebuild section, if the easements are required, that piece can be constructed first, and that 69 kV can be energized while the construction on the rest of the 35 miles is ongoing. It can be a segmented project because we're taking a piece of the transmission system out of play for a while until we tear it down and rebuild, but then we can energize that piece back and have it available to us while these other ends of the project are ongoing. It's just a phasing and construction segmenting issue. But there are different deadlines as a result of having to tear down and rebuild a piece of line that we depend on now.
Okay. And I think you told us, I just want to clarify this so I understand it. I think you told us previously that the little zig or zag, whichever you want to call it, between segments 12 and 13, and then heading back north, segment 10, starting at that little zig or zag there at 12 and 13, that's a rebuild.
Yes, immediately above that white block that's labeled Lancaster.
Yeah.
From there to the
All the way
north,
back to...
all the way to where I believe where 8 and 9 separate.
Okay. All right, those are all the questions that I have. Mr.
I have one.
Oh, okay.
Ms. Warner, if you had chosen, and I'm not going to get into the letters, but the segment 11 over 12 and 13, would you all be rebuilding? You would rebuild from Newbie down section 10, and then 11 would be new build. Would you rebuild 12?
No, you'd split off from the 69 kV farther to the northeast if that overall route had been best.
Thank you.
Mr. Goodpaster, do you have any redirect?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify and maybe elaborate a little bit. Ms. Warner, you said that, or noted that the HR selected route was $1.2 million more expensive than the next most expensive segment.
Well, it's $1 million more than ER roughly, and roughly 1.2 more than GR.
You also noted that HR had more rebuild mileage in there. Is there a correlation between the additional costs of HR and the fact that it has more rebuild?
It costs more to tear down an existing line and put a new one up than it does to just put a new one up, yes.
And I'm, as being as unorganized as I am, I may be jumping back and forth and not doing my redirect in a very logical order, so please bear with me, Mr. Chairman. You also made a statement with referring to, I believe, Vice Chairman Clay's question concerning Exhibit 10 as to what the purple portions on that segment are. I believe you testified that they were the combined alternative corridors. Is that not the combined macro corridors? Just to make sure the record is correct.
Yes, yes, that's a correction. If you look at the key on Exhibit 10, the purple area is labeled combined macro corridor, which is kind of one level up from the alternative corridor phase.
Okay.
Mr. Goodpaster, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I've got to thinking, I haven't given Connie a break here, and she probably needs a break. Would you mind? You said you're disorganized. I'll give you 10 minutes to organize.
No, you'll give me 10 minutes to become more disorganized.
Let's take 10 minutes. Take a 10-minute break and come back at 5 minutes till the hour. record, I never can remember my case numbers. Case number 2006-00463. Let the record reflect that all parties are present, represented by counsel. Mr. Goodpasture, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Warner, let's go back to Vice Chairman Clay's question concerning Exhibit 10. You first responded that the purple areas shown on that exhibit were the combined alternate corridors. Upon redirect, I referred you to the exhibit, and the exhibit, you testified, the exhibit states that those are combined macro corridors. Let me ask that question one more time. What does the purple represent?
Purple is the alternative corridors. The legend is incorrect. So my first answer was correct, and then after looking at it more closely and after reading from the legend is incorrect. So they are the combined alternative corridors.
Also, moving to the testimony concerning potentially routing the line around the perimeter of the Kirby property. In any shape or form, in your opinion, Ms. Warner, would that be good engineering practice?
The perimeter, the way we discussed it, it would not be good engineering practice to follow the perimeter.
There was also testimony concerning the open houses. I think you testified there were 2 open houses held on this particular project. Who holds those open houses that you were referring to?
Those are sponsored by East Kentucky Power.
And who attends those?
People who are affected by the project, folks are invited who are within the alternative route corridors that we identify. In greenfield areas, they're half-mile wide. In rebuild areas, I think they're 1,000 feet wide, and we rely on the PVA information to send personal invitations to those individuals owning property in those areas and advertising in the local newspaper.
Now, at the point, and Mr. Bertelson asked you about the point at which the proposed segment, strike that please, asked you about where segment 11 would cross the existing KU transmission lines across the Holton property. And you testified that, I believe you testified that proposed, or that subdivision, that is a platted subdivision in the PVA. Where did East Kentucky Power get the information with respect to that platted subdivision, right where that intersection is?
I need to correct that. We actually received information about that at our open house. The plat is recorded in the county clerk's office, but not in the PVA office. So there was some confusion about where that information came from.
I believe that's all I have.
Mr. Bertelson, do you have any follow-up?
Yes, Your Honor, just a couple of small housekeeping matters. If I did not before ask that Commission's Exhibit 2 be admitted into the record of this matter, then I request...
Any objection?
No objection.
Okay, let it be in.
And for purposes of clarity, Your Honor, I think I'll ask Ms. Warner to read her handwritten notes that she put onto Commission's Exhibit 1, just for purposes of clarity regarding the record. Since they're her handwriting, I prefer that she read it than somebody else interpret what was read. Ms. Warner, I'm going to hand you what previously marked as Commission's Exhibit number 1. You had made some handwritten notes on it earlier. Chairman Goss had a question about if you could indicate with a pen or otherwise highlight where the proposed route crosses the existing KU line. You made some handwritten notes. Can you read those?
Yes, I circled the area where the intersection occurs, and the handwritten note says KU/EK centerline intersection.
And did you put your initials there as well?
There's a marker here. I may improve this a little bit, make it a little more visible, if that's acceptable.
Yes.
Today's date is the
22nd.
22nd. Okay.
And if I could just ask one final question, just with regard to the three routes that were the three best routes that were selected by or indicated by the route selection analysis. From an engineering standpoint, is there any difference with regard to those three with regard to whether one is better over the other with regard to the system for reliability purposes?
Electrically, they should perform the same.
So there's no difference electrically from one to the other?
No, I can think of.
And that is all, Your Honor.
Okay. Anything further, Commissioners?
No, sir.
Okay. Anything further? Okay.
Nothing.
All right, Mr. Warner, thank you, ma'am. You may step aside. Go ahead, Mr. Goodpasture, and call your next witness.
Darren Adams.
Adams, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Okay, Mr. Goodpasture, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you state your name, please?
Darren Adams,
Where do you live, Mr. Adams?
1301 Wakehurst Court in Lexington, Kentucky.
What is your educational background?
I've got a Bachelor of Arts degree from Transylvania University and also a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Kentucky.
Are you employed?
Yes, I am.
By whom?
East Kentucky Power Cooperative,
And in what position?
Manager of Transmission Planning.
And what are your duties and responsibilities in that position?
I'm responsible for the performance and the direct supervision of analyses and studies related to the expansion and modification of our transmission system.
And did you identify the need and prepare the justification for this particular transmission line that's the subject of these proceedings?
Yes, I did.
Did you prepare written testimony that was submitted as an exhibit to the application filed in this case?
I did.
And do you adopt that testimony today and incorporate that into the record of this hearing?
Yes, I do.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Birtle.
And just very briefly, Mr. Adams, you're familiar with Public Service Commission case number 2006-564?
No, I'm not.
Are you familiar with the case in which the Commission recently granted allowed East Kentucky to maintain its certificate for construction of some new generating facilities at the J.K. Smith plant?
Yes.
Okay. And is the granting of that by the Commission, did that form the basis for the need for this transmission line?
That is correct. The generation that is the subject of that case drove the justification of this transmission project.
No further questions.
Questions?
No, sir.
Redirect?
Nothing further.
Okay, Mr. Adams, thank you. You may step aside. And Mr. Goodpasture, call your next witness.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes the applicant's case.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Bertelsen, do you desire that East Kentucky provide any other witnesses for testimony with respect to any possible questions that the Commission or staff might have?
Yeah, I do, Your Honor, request that if it would be possible for East Kentucky to provide as a post-hearing data request the change in cost of the project if segment 11 was used instead of segments 12 and 13.
Well, I think she said that, I believe that was addressed because segment 11 was GR.
Or ER.
No, I think,
Mr. Chairman, if...
yeah, no, but it's, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
If I may
I'm
be of
sorry.
some assistance here. I believe, Mr. Burleson, that information is included on Exhibit 10, because that route segment, or that route, I believe that you're referring to, Mr. Burleson, is Route GR. Is that correct? So the cost for Route GR would be, the only change between GR and HR would be the use of segment 11 as opposed to segments 12 and 13.
And Ms. Warner previously testified as to the cost differentials.
Yes.
If I understand, well, let me ask you, I won't ask Ms. Warner because she's not on the witness stand, but let me ask you, Mr. Goodpaster, well, strike that. Mr. Burleson, I think Ms. Warner previously testified as to the cost differentials, but if you would like for her to retake the stand to clarify that, I'm sure that Mr. Goodpaster would be more than happy to make her available.
I think, Your Honor, she did adequately address that.
Okay.
I had that in my notes.
Well, I mean, if she didn't, don't let me, I don't want to try your case for you. If she didn't, why, she can either retake the stand or we can do the post-hearing data request, but I believe she addressed it.
I believe she did. She indicated that the Route GR was about $1.2 million less expensive than Route HR, which would be the difference between 11 and segments 12 and 13. And then she indicated that Route ER, which also would have used segment 11, was about $960,000 less expensive than HR.
Does that answer your?
I believe that
Okay.
does address that question. I apologize for.
That's no problem. Okay. Well, that takes care of that. Do you desire any further witnesses be presented from East Kentucky? Let's start with East Kentucky.
I do not, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you wish to call Mr. and Mrs. Price or one or the other? I don't mean Price, Kirby.
I would, Your Honor. I'd like to allow Brian Kirby the opportunity to address whether or not he believes the East Kentucky has adequately addressed the issues that he raised in his public comments.
Okay. Mr. Brian Kirby, do you come forward? You intend to limit the questioning to that issue, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Kirby, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please have a seat. Go ahead, Mr. Burleson, and question.
Mr. Kirby, can you please state your full name for the record, please, and your
Brian Wesley Kirby,
and what's your address?
1109 Valley Run Drive, Richmond, Kentucky.
And you're aware of the proposed East Kentucky power line that is proposed by East Kentucky to run across your property, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you attend a public hearing in Richmond on August 2nd of this year?
I did.
Okay. Did you give spoken public comments at that time?
Yes.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to read the minutes that were filed into the case, into the record of this case that were taken at that meeting?
No.
Did you also submit written comments by email?
I did.
Okay. When did you submit those comments?
I believe those were submitted Friday.
Friday, this past Friday?
Excuse me, it was Monday, August 20th, correction.
After the public hearing on the 2nd, did you attend a meeting afterward with employees of East Kentucky?
Yes,
Okay. Did you ask further questions of them at that time?
we did.
Okay. Can you generally state what your questions were and what the answers that were given?
There were questions pertaining to possibilities of changing the route due to the impact upon our farm. Answers, and again, this is just my interpretation, answers in that case were there were other factors involved, that a change of the route was not feasible. expenses, logistics, a lot of different factors is what was told to us. I also examined the environmental assessment that was done on farm, on the entire route, and as it impacted our farm, just to ask some basic questions about the methodologies used for the environmental. We talked with the right-of-way agents about the procedures, inquired about the width of the easement, inquired the impact. In other words, would it be a clear cut? And we were assured that it would be a clear cut, that all trees would be removed and any other obstructions would be removed. Believe we were also informed that as far as the restoration, the post-construction restoration was discussed. That's off the top of my head. That was the majority of the information that was dispensed to us.
Okay. Leaving that meeting, did you feel that East Kentucky had adequately addressed the issues that you had brought up?
No.
Why did you feel that way?
Well, of course, I'm trying to recall all the conversations that we had that evening, and other parties of our family also had conversations. Several things that we're left hanging with here. One of which is I think you all have discussed already about the proposed residential developments along any particular alternate route, and the numbers of those proposed developments and their impact upon the scoring. In this instance, ER, GR, and HR versus one another. We're still not satisfied we're not satisfied from that meeting that the information that these numbers were derived from was accurate. Garrett County does not have planning and zoning, so there's not a P&Z board one would go before. The procedures, if we understand it correctly, is to survey, plat, if you propose subdividing a particular tract of land, was to survey and plat that, and then file it with the county clerk's office. We have heard this morning that there's discussion of one of these, but we've not been told, and we've asked at the meeting, evidence that in every one of these routes, all 16 routes, was there a determination without any question that these were indeed platted and filed, not platted or speculated upon. PVA information, and I don't mean to wander off the reservation here, Mr. Chairman, but PVA information may not be as up-to-date as we would all prefer. Example, you can have deeds, which I think there was an amendment done to a report here by East Kentucky Power. There were deeds that were filed at the county clerk's office, but it had not made its way to the PVA's office. So I would question the timeliness of the PVA information that is being used as a scoring criteria. One of the points. Another point we were not satisfied with, but was straightened out this morning, was the particular historic structure. The potential historic structure has now been determined to be on the National Register of Historic Places. So that seems to have eliminated that as a factor. However, we still question, we have a cemetery that is along Sugar Creek Pike, which our farm is bordered by US 27 and Sugar Creek Pike. We have a cemetery on Sugar Creek Pike that has a Revolutionary War soldier buried there. There's an obelisk, a very large obelisk, so it's pretty hard to miss, and it's right on the edge of the road. I guess our question is why this was not considered a potential historic site as well. I don't believe there's been any determination on that one way or the other. It does lie within 1,500 feet of the proposed route. I guess the third, and I don't know if it's final, but the third.
May I interrupt you? Did you raise that question with the East Kentucky folks at the public hearing?
I'd asked if there was a review done of the cemetery and was assured that there was, or had it been incorporated. I did not read that. Was assured that the cemetery had been reviewed.
Okay. Go ahead.
But again, when you do an environmental assessment, it's the job of the archaeologist or the historical consultant then to make that determination, not the staff of East Kentucky Power. I guess I'm like Mr. Goodpasture. Let me get organized here. I think we've also had, and
There were comments made by members of our family alluding to the possibility of using the perimeters, I believe it was, or the edge of the property lines as a possible alternate route, just to see if that was a possibility. And I feel there may have been a great deal of effort on East Kentucky Power's part to examine that at great length. But our comments at the public hearing and our comments at the meeting afterwards to East Kentucky Power was not on those lines. It was a shift of the line in a northward direction, a more northerly direction, which is probably more easily explained as Route 11, I believe it is, trying to do this off the top of my head. But other routes there, again, if your determination was avoidance of proposed residential developments, avoidance of a potential, at that time, a potential historic site, it was a complete shift of the lines. We were not proposing that it just skirt the perimeter, because that's not, as the East Kentucky Power's witness has told you then, that's not feasible. It's pretty expensive and would probably have a pretty dramatic visual impact, but that was not our intent. That was not the impression we wanted to give. It was simply a question that was asked. I didn't want us to wander too far off the reservation on our request for additional information, or at least our request to shift the line in the northward direction.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burleson, do you have any other questions?
I think that, Your Honor, concludes the questions that we have.
Okay, commissioners have any questions?
No.
Okay, Mr. Goodpaster, do you wish to question?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kirby, just to review what occurred at the meeting that was held between East Kentucky Power personnel and various property owners after the local public hearing, August 2nd, and specifically with respect to the meetings or conversations you may have had with East Kentucky Power personnel yourself. Our notes, East Kentucky Power's notes, indicate that you had a question concerning the right-of-way estimates used in various cost estimates, and according to your calculation, the average payment was to be $7,000 per property owner, and that seems low. Did you not, in fact, meet with Mr. Bruce Murray at that particular meeting, who explained to you the process that East Kentucky Power utilizes to arrive at the estimates, number one, the estimates of the acquisition cost, and number two, how the actual negotiations and offers will be determined?
Yes, he gave us a little more detail on the methodologies used for the overall acquisition prices or costs that could be incurred on any of the routes. Yes, sir. Okay.
Also, did you not meet with Mr. Brandon Grillon, who explained to you the routing process, the EPRI GTC model, and explained why the selected alternative was in fact selected?
Members of my family were involved with the conversation, but I was not directly involved.
Okay, but you do recall Mr. Grillon speaking with members of your family who addressed the issues of why that line is routed where it's routed?
He spoke with my family, yes. That I can confirm.
And you, in fact, did meet with Mr. Joe Settles at that meeting, and he addressed the issues concerning the historic sites that were set forth in the EA with you.
Among other subjects, yes.
That's all.
All these communications that Mr. Goodpaster just referenced, did they occur at the public hearing in Richmond?
They
After
occurred-
the hearing had concluded?
Yes, sir, after the hearing, and if I may, at the public hearing, I expressed my objection to having the conversations, informal conversations with East Kentucky Power staff be completely off the record, as it is off the record, because we are at a point here several days later after the meeting trying to recall exact conversations, and there were several family members there that had different conversations with different members.
Have you had any communication with East Kentucky Power with regard to any of these outstanding issues after everyone left Richmond that evening?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Anything further?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Very much, Mr. Curry. You may step aside. Okay. I presume, Mr. Burleson, you don't have anything further, is that right?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Goodpaster, does East Kentucky have anything further?
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
All right, let's talk about times and logistics here. As I understand it, Mr. Burleson, a final order is due from the commission, in this case, no later than September the 19th. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor. That's our
And-
statutory date.
All right, and the current procedural schedule, I think, provides for the filing of briefs no later than August 31.
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster, do you deem August 31 to be a problem for your client?
I do not.
Well, all right, we will then expect to receive East Kentucky's brief. Mr. Burleson, let me ask this question. Do you, from the staff's perspective, do you want a brief? Would a brief be helpful from East Kentucky, or are you prepared for the brief just to be optional on East Kentucky's part?
I think, Your Honor, we would, we would make it optional.
Okay. All right, well, Mr. Goodpaster, you're certainly welcome to file a brief if you want to. I don't know that the procedural schedule says that it's optional. If it does not, then we'll amend it orally here. Certainly, if you want to file a brief, I'm sure the staff would appreciate receiving one. If you do not wish to file a brief and you want to stand on the record as it is now and as has been created here at this hearing, you're more than happy to do that too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will notify Mr. Burleson within the next day or two as to whether we desire to file a brief or whether to expect a brief from East Kentucky.
Okay, all right. And I want to say also to the Kirbys that the commission very much appreciates you all coming today, taking time off from your schedules to appear, especially to Mr. Kirby for offering testimony. I know this commission very much understands your concern and the role, and we appreciate the role that you've taken in this case. And also we appreciate the intervenors, although they're not here today. They apparently had previously taken some action with regard to this matter, so we appreciate their participation as well. Okay, if there's nothing further, then, gentlemen, the commission will go ahead and adjourn the hearing pending receipt of briefs or not receiving briefs, and then we will endeavor to get an order out before the 19th, if at all possible, one way or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you all very much. Commission will be adjourned.